In Psalm 60, David has taken the throne. There's still pockets of resistance around the country, but it's taken him 17 years now since the time that Samuel anointed him to be able to be king over Israel to the time he actually takes the throne. And so here is David. He is on the throne, and he's deciding to try to unite the country. And David says in these verses that we have here how the Lord has given him help and how the Lord has been able to strengthen him to be able to carry out all the things that he is in need of. It says here in verse 7 that Gilead is mine and Manasseh is mine. Ephraim also is the strength of my head. Judah is my lawgiver. And then he goes on to the foreign countries, the countries that did not like God at all. They hated God. And they were pagan countries. And he says, Moab is my washpot. In other words, I defeated Moab. They were an enemy of mine. And I just washed my hands of who they were. And I put them aside. And he beat them. Then he talks about, over Edom I will cast my shoe. Philistia, triumph thou because of me. He's talking about the Philistines. How he had triumphed over the Philistines, who were a pain in the tush. All of the Israelites' life, these enemies had constantly moved in and out, and they were trouble. And he compiles this list of triumphs, how God had triumphed over this enemy in life, God had triumphed that over that enemy in life, and God has done all these wonderful things. And I'm reminded today of a number of groups of people, the Jebusites, who came in when Joshua was supposed to take over the country, over Canaan. They could not get rid of these Jebusites. And these Jebusites were pagan. And on the Temple Mount, they built this fortress. They built this castle for their false god that they worshiped. And next to that castle on the Temple Mount was a tent where God was supposed to rest in the tent. This was before, obviously, Solomon built the temple. And the tent did not even have the Ark of the Covenant because the Philistines had taken it. He took care of that, and now it was an resting place. And as I preached, it was on the way back. It wasn't even there yet. And history says that when the sun came up, when you looked at this ungodly castle that the Jebusites had, you could see this horrible looking figure, like a horror creature, in the shadows. And when the sun set, you could see another evil-looking creature. And so David gets this thought into his mind. He says, you know what? I'm the king over all this country. Joshua made a terrible deal with these Jebusites to keep them, but he kept them. But he says, they've got this huge castle on the Temple Mount for some pagan god that's not even real. I've got my tent where the Ark of the Covenant should be, and he's not even there. So he says, this shouldn't be. This ought not to be. And so he goes up to the top of the Temple Mount with his army, and he crushes down this castle. He pulverizes it. And all of Israel is united. They're saying hallelujah. Finally, we're done with that castle. And finally, the Ark of the Covenant does return. And so David is thinking, this is a wonderful thing that God has given us. That he has given him the strength to be able to endure, the strength to be able to make it. But then we read further on in the book of Joshua, going back now, David recalls what God had promised to Abraham. And don't you know the promises of God are yea and amen, amen? They are yea and amen. And so God made a covenant with Abraham back in Genesis 15 and 18. It says, in that same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed I have given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. And you see, David remembered that. And also in the book of Joshua, the same thing is repeated there, where God makes, again, this covenant with Joshua as he's ready to go into the promised land. And he makes this promise. He said, every place the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that I have given unto you, as I said unto Moses, from the wilderness and this Lebanon unto the great river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites unto the great sea, toward the going down the sun shall be your coast. And so there were these promises that God had made with David, or had made with Joshua, but also had made with Abraham. And David looks back at these promises and he's saying to himself, hey, wait a minute. He's surveying the country and he's saying, how come we're only occupying up to where Edom is, which is now the famous Petra mountain range, Petra. He says, why are we only gone this far? We're given all the way to the land of Euphrates, which is way over there. But he finds that through the course of time, that the Israelites came up to the mountains where Edom was. What is Edom? Edom are the descendants of Esau, which was the twin brother of Jacob. And God told his mother that there would be two nations inside of you. There would be the Israel and there would be the pagans. And so they fought with each other, they fought with each other, they fought with each other. But the Edomites were that of the descendants of Esau. And they lived on this straight mountain, looking straight up with caves that they were able to live in. And there was no way that you could get into this mountain and take it, because there was only one skinny path that came up to the top to be able to take it. And don't you know, if you ever came up there with an army, and you came up with an army to overtake that mountain, that the Edomites would just take rocks and they'd throw the rocks at you and they'd crush you. And so there was no way to take this, and Israel, through the course of time, had just given up. But David remembered the promises of God. David remembered that the promises of God were that I'm not selling you short by just leading you up to the mountain of Edom, but I promised you a whole third more than what you're living for right now. And God has given us wonderful promises too. The Lord in 2:21 says that it shall come to pass that so whomsoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. That's a promise of God. No man can direct that and change it or alter it. That's a promise of God. In 2 Peter 3:9, the Lord is not slack concerning his promises, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but all should come to repentance. God is wishing that all would come to a saving knowledge of his Son. He wishes that none would perish and escape the wonderful possibilities of being in Christ Jesus. And so we too have promises. And God has given us territory too. The territory that God has given us is repeated in Mark 16 and 15. For you and I that are living in the New Testament, he says, and he said unto them, go ye into the world and preach the gospel to every creature. So for us who are living in this new dispensation in the New Testament, God said, I've given you this world. I've given you this world to be able to go into, to be able to spread the gospel, to be able to show people that Christ is real. Now you have to use wisdom when you deal with communist countries and countries that will absolutely tear you apart if you walk into them. But the preaching of the gospel is still going forth by 50,000 watt radio stations by shortwave, FM, AM are being broadcasted across the seas. The gospel is still going into communist countries, and people are still being saved. Amen. But Edom would not let Israel in when they were coming across into the promised land. And God had told them to let them go. They're the brother of Jacob, Esau, let him go. But God had prophesied that he would take care of Edom. If you read the book of Obadiah, he prophesied their destruction. He also prophesied in Jeremiah 49:16. He says that the terribleness has deceived thee, and the pride of thy heart, O thou that dwell in the cliffs of the rock, that holdeth the heights of the hill. Thou shouldest make thy nest as high as an eagle. I will bring these down from hence, says the Lord. The Lord says there are these people, the Edomites, and they're going to be your enemy, but it's only going to be for a while. The narrow way to be able to get up to the top, many would not go. So many people become complacent and never fulfill what God has for them because they're content with not facing the fact that they need to take a mountain that's in their way. You see, that mountain is a hard mountain, and the enemy is in control over that mountain. And when you say, I want more for God than what I have, all sorts of resistance breaks loose. When you start praying for lost family members, when you start praying for those that you love, when you start praying for your own situation, and you really get intense with God, it's amazing how the enemy reacts. And how the enemy starts throwing stones at us. You see, the enemy doesn't want us to go to the Euphrates. The enemy wants us to stay on this side of Edom. But watch this. God has promised us all the way to the Euphrates River. God has promised us more than what we got right now. And we cannot be content with what we got right now, but we got to cry out to the Lord and say, Lord, you promised us all the way to the river Euphrates. I want all that's mine. I don't want to sell myself short. I don't want to shorten Christianity. And the thing is, the enemy knows that you own it all the way to the Euphrates. The enemy knows that you own that mountain. The enemy knows that you own it all. And yet he tries to tell you and I, to convince you and I, it's really not ours. We really have no right to grab it or apprehend it. But God says, I have given it to you to possess. He promised it to Abraham. Again, he promised it to Joshua. And God says, it's yours. And David saw that. David saw that. Why are we selling ourselves short? Why are we selling ourselves short on this side of Edom when God has promised us so much more? And you see so many Christians, when they get into a little tiff with the devil, when the enemy comes at them with the stones and says, you're not going any farther than this. This is the time, gentlemen, that we need to plant our feet on the solid rock of Jesus Christ. And we say, Lord, you have given us precious promises. You have given us the wonderful shield of faith. And if you look at Ephesians chapter 6, you have given us all the weaponry that we need to be able to reach out to the Euphrates. And we can't let the enemy of your mind and mine try to trick us in our head to be able to think that we need to settle for less. But we ask to say, Lord, give me the river Euphrates. Give me all that's mine. I want all that's mine, Lord. And so God said it was yours. Now back in Numbers in 14:7, there were 12 spies that went into the land of Canaan to be able to spy it out. And 10 of them brought back a report. And they said this, in not so many words. They said, you know what? The land is flowing with milk and honey. The fruit is wonderful. It tastes great. But there's giants in that land. But Jacob and Caleb came back, and they brought back a good report. And they said this in Numbers 14, 7 and 8. And they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search it is an exceedingly good land. And here's the key, gentlemen, in verse 8. If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. In other words, don't look at the size of those giants in that land. Don't look at the enemies in that land. But look how big your God is. And look what God has promised to you. You see, you and I, many times, will never fulfill what God has in our life because we look at how big the enemy is and we don't look how big our God is. But if we continue to look at how big our God is, then we can see that our God is able to defeat anything that comes in our way. And you and I, well, along with God, is able to defeat anything that the enemy has for us. Amen? Amen. Anything that the enemy would bring toward us and hurl at us, it won't matter. Because if we keep our feet strong, standing on the gospel of Jesus Christ, if we stand on his word, the only thing that we need to know is that God is for us. And if God is for us, who can be against us? Amen?